Welcome to part 9 of the VR character series. Before we start, I wanted to let you know that this is the last part of the blueprint series. Next, I will create the full C++ tutorial for this series. It will take me a lot of time to complete it since I am going to post it all in one video. I will post occasional short form content to keep you updated though. Additionally, I will also improve some things which I wasn't too happy with in this series since C++ delivers more performance. Together with the C++ version, I will also release the project on fab.com. For those who don't want to watch hours of tutorials. Because I am going to sell the project, I will also be creating my own assets and animations. But enough talk, let's get started. In this video I used a physics and animation based approach to hit reactions. Animations can be customized based on the bone that was hit. Let's start by first going to our content browser, go to Blueprints, Weapons, and in here in our E-damage type enum, we want to add another enumeration called none. Also make sure to grab it here on the left and move it all the way to the top so that this is the default response. Then you can close this, and the next step is very important. We want to go to the control rig folder, characters, mannequins, and then rigs. In here we have our physics asset. Now we want to right click it and duplicate. I'm going to call this PA_enemy. In here we want to select all the bodies by pressing Ctrl A. And then here on the right on collision response, we want to change this from multiple values to enabled. Because since we're going to use physics, we want all of the bodies to have a collision response. Because in the other physics asset, the one that we use for our character, only our hands have a collision response. Meaning if we were to try to hit the enemy on the arm, our weapon would just go right through. This is why we duplicate this and change the collision response for all bodies. And while we're here, I'm also going to delete some bodies, for example, the neck and clavicle ones, because they are just in the way when we try to stab the enemy. And I'm also going to remove some of the spine bodies, simply because I found that it was a little bit buggy when I tried to stab it, but there was another body in the way because it only disabled. For example, when I tried to stab the spine 03 body, the collision with this body and the penetrated object was disabled, but then it was still colliding with the spine 2, for example, which we've now deleted. So this is why we don't actually want too many bodies in here. Next we are going to go back to the blueprints folder, interfaces, and we will go into our damage interface. Then on the top right, we want to select our damage function, and we are going to add a new input. This we will call bone name, and it's of type name. We use this so we can then tell the animation blueprint which body was hit, and then we can play an animation according to it. Then next we want to go back into our blueprints folders, weapon, and open up the weapon base. Then in the event graph we want to change the onComponent hit event. Because in our component hit we have the function that we created, deal damage, and in here we are using the interface which is now requiring a bone name. So we are going to select this function, deal damage, and in here we are also going to add the bone name input variable, input parameter of type name. Then back in our event graph, here we are going to drag this back a little bit and input the hit bone name. Next we have to edit the onComponent begin overlap, because only while testing this I realized that the sweep result does not actually return any bone names that we've potentially hit. So I'm going to disconnect this by pressing Alt and left clicking it, and then I will grab all of this and move this forward a bit to make some space. I'm going to fix this with a simple sphere trace. So from the true condition, we are going to add a sphere trace by channel. And then for our trace location, we are going to get the penetration hitbox and get its world location. This will be the start and the end, since it's a sphere trace. And for the radius, I'm just going to add a value of, let's say, 10. Then here the out hit, we can connect it to the break hit result node and input the bone name into our previous set penetration constraint function and the deal damage function. And in here, of course, before I forget it, we also want to get the bone name variable. This is pretty much the only workaround that I found for this problem, since the sweep result doesn't seem to return any bone names. This will definitely work better in C++ because I don't know how much performance impact a sphere trace has. I don't think it's too much, since this only happens one time on the begin overlap, so it shouldn't draw down any performance. But in C++, we definitely have more room to play around with these traces. That's it for the weapon base. Then we also want to go over to our magazines folder, ammo, bullets, and edit the bullet base. Since here in the event graph, we also have a on-component hit event. And here where we call the damage, we will get the hit result. We will break it. And from here, we will get the hit bone name. Next, we need an enum for our body parts. So let's go to our animation blueprints folder, right click, go to blueprint and add a new enumeration. I will call this E_body part. The first is going to be none. Then I will add 6 new enumerations. The first one is called upper arm_R. And the next one is the upper arm L. They are the bone names of our skeleton. So you have here upper arm L, for example. Here you only need to add the bones for which you want to play a special animation when they're hit. Then I also want to use the thigh R and thigh L, the pelvis, and the spine O3. Now make sure here that you only add bones for which you also have a physics body. So if I open up the physics asset, this is the one of the players. This is why here are more. Actually, let me open up the one from the enemy. So you see here we have spine 3, spine 5, but no spine 2, for example. So you won't be able to hit that body. So make sure that the bones that you add to the body part enum actually exist in the physics asset. Now, if you check our character and we select the mesh, we can see its collision preset is custom because we want it to be a physics body, but we also don't want it to collide with the pawn, because when you're simulating physics, that would mean that our hands would collide with our collision capsule, which is of object type pawn. However, if you remember when we added the bullets, here the mesh, it also has a custom preset and it's of object type pawn while ignoring the pawn, because on the shotgun we spawn many bullets, meaning they would collide with each other. Now to fix this, because if we were to shoot the enemy right now, the bullets would just go through him and don't actually collide with him, we are going to go to the project settings. If you don't already have it open, you can go to the top right settings and select project settings. Then on the left, under engine, we are going to go to collision. Then first we are going to add a new object channel. I will call this projectile. The default response should be block. And I'm also going to add a new preset. It's also called projectile. The collision enabled is collision enabled query and physics. The object type is projectile. And we want it to ignore the pawn and other projectiles. One thing I forgot to mention is after you've created your new collision response, you want to go to the content browser, go to the bullet base, and in here select the bullet mesh and set its collision preset to projectile. Now you can see the bullets will collide with our mesh because they're of type physics body, and since this physics body ignores pawns but not projectiles, it will no longer just ignore the projectile. But that's for the VR characters. Actually, in your VR character, if you want to, can turn this off so that you won't be able to shoot yourself. I will leave it on for now, but this is just a minor detail. Next, we can begin creating the enemy. Now, the enemy won't be too complex. He's just gonna stand there. He won't roam around or anything since this is only for the hit reactions. So we are going to open up the content browser, right click, add a new blueprint class of type character. I call it BP_enemy. We open it up, we can select the mesh. And in here we want to change the collision preset from character mesh to physics actor and then to custom, because now we only have these settings, and the only settings that we want to, the only collision response we want to ignore is the pawn and the vehicle. You have to change it from a character mesh to a physics actor first, because if we try to simulate physics, the character mesh doesn't have collision enabled, it only has query only. And but then we can't apply a physical animation. We can also go to the skeletal mesh asset and select our SKM many. And if we search for physics asset override, here we can select our PA enemy. So we have the correct collisions. Here, select the capsule. So we can see it has a capsule half height of 88. So we're going to select the mesh again and add an offset of -88 to the z-axis. And you can see the positive x-axis is to the right of the is to the left of the character mesh. So from its perspective. So we're going to add a -90-degree rotation to the z value. So now it's always facing forward. Then let's go into the event graph. Here we will be setting up the physical animation first. So we're going to add a new component, physical animation. And we will get the mesh. We will set all bodies below simulate physics. For the bone name, we are going to drag this out and call make literal name, and we will input pelvis. Then we want to simulate physics and make sure to not include self. Then I have found that there is sometimes a bug where everything just crashes, especially when you try to spawn the enemy while it wants to use a physical animation. So we first will need to add a delay of 0.2 seconds, should be fine. And only then we can initiate the physical animation. So here we want to set the skeletal mesh component. Here we will get the mesh. And then we can apply physical animation settings below. And the body name is going to be the pelvis. That's going to use this from back here. So you only have to change it at one point. And here we want to make physical animation data. I will use an orientation strength of 1000, not 10,000. I will use an orientation strength of 1000, an angular velocity strength of 100, a position strength of 1000, and velocity strength of 100. For the max linear force, I'm going to set it to 2000, and the same for the max angular force. This means the animation won't be as strong, because if it's set to 0, it can just use infinite force basically, and we will make everything much more stiffer. So if you add here a value like 2000, it's a bit less stiff. If you would only use 100, for example, then it would be rather floppy. So these are the settings I'm going to use. You can play around with this. Oh, and also very important, make sure to untick is local simulation. Then we will select the class settings, and under interfaces, we will add a new interface, and we are going to add the damage interface. Make sure it's the BPI damage interface that we created in a previous part. And then from this interface, we are going to call override in the functions, and we are going to override the damage. Then to notify the animation blueprint of the damage that we've just taken, we are going to add a new event dispatcher. And we will call it on damage taken. We will need two inputs. The first one is the damage type damage type. And the second input is the hit bone name of type name. Now we can call this and input our parameters from the interface. Except for the amount of damage, you can handle this in here. But again, this is only for the animation part, so if you already have a health system, this is where you can use the value to subtract the health. This is already it for the enemy blueprint. Now we can go into our animation blueprints. Here, right click under animation, new animation blueprint for our SK mannequin skeleton. I will call it ABP_enemy. And before I continue in here, we will need to do one last thing in our enemy blueprint. When we select the mesh, in the top under animation, we want to set the animation class to our ABP enemy. So that this will make sure that our character will use our blueprint, our animation blueprint. Back in our animation blueprint, I'm first going to add some variables. The first one is the enemy reference, and it's of type BP_enemy. The next one is the damage type, of type damage type. Then we also want the hit body part, and it's of type body part. And the last one is the was body part found variable of type bool. Then in our event graph, we can start by casting our try-get pawn owner to our enemy. And then we can, and if the cast is successful, we can set the enemy reference. Then from this enemy reference, we can call assign on damage taken. Make sure you get the one that we created and not on take any damage, because we had to create this so we can pass our parameters, because as far as I know, you can't pass additional parameters to take any damage. So we are going to assign this to the one that we had, to the one that we created. Then the damage type we can simply set to our damage type. And then from here we want to set was body part found to false. And then we are going to add a for each loop for our body part enum. This will loop through the whole enum that we created. And here we are going to get our hit bone name, cast it to a string. We want to cast it to string. And here we want to check if the name that we passed is actually in this enum. I haven't found a better way in blueprints where you can simply just cast it to this and where it would either return the type or just none. I believe there is a way to do it in C++, so you don't have to loop through it every time, but I'm not too sure. So I will have to look into that further for the C++ version. But anyway, this is how we do it for now. Here we want to get enum to string, which will return the name of the enum. So if we open it back up, it will return, for example, upper arm _r. So the same as we get from the hit bone name. And here we can now compare the string case insensitive. And if this is true, connect it to the loop body. We can get the enum, and that is our damage. Set it to our body part variable. And then, of course, make sure to set was body part found to true. Then if it's after the complete output, add a branch. And here get the was body part found. And only if it is false, make sure to set the hit body part to none. Now I have already created some variables for injured. So here you can see he's holding his left arm. I simply created them as a pose. I didn't put too much work into it because simply they're just animations and I haven't found really useful ones on Mixamo. So you can create this yourself or get them from elsewhere. Maybe you already have a bunch of animations. Just make sure that in here you create a new animation notifier. So let me delete this one. You can right click, make sure it's in this track of the notifies where it has a 1. Add notify and new notify. Or if you already have a notify created, you will find it in this list and you can simply add it like that. You can also drag this around and still move it, but I will leave it here. Now on default, allow frame stripping is set to true. I'm not sure if this can interfere with this animation anim notify. I usually like to turn it off, but but I'm not sure if this is necessary. There were times where I felt like this was skipped and it stopped skipping it when I disabled this, but I'll leave it up to you. Then after you've added those animation notifiers back in our animation blueprint, you can right click and call the anim notify injured end or whatever you called it. And then we want to set the hit body part to none. This is so after the animation is played, our character goes back to his idle pose or whatever it is, so he won't stay stuck in the injured animation. Since in most video games that I know, if you hit someone, they aren't just injured forever, they also heal or whatever, or they continue to fight. This is why we use these notifies. Next, I'm going to go to the Enum graph, and in our asset browser, I will search for an idle animation. I will use the idle. This is just so our character doesn't T-pose. I will add a animation layer. I will call it hit reaction. And we also want an input pose. Back in our animation graph, we will call this and input our idle pose. Now we can go back to the hit reaction. And in here, since we want to use the input pose multiple times, but we can only get one input, I'm going to save this in a new cached pose. I will call it default pose, because for some reason you can use the cached poses multiple times, but not the input node or even the animation layers. For whatever reason, I'm not too sure why. But anyway, to the output, we will add a blend poses based on our damage type. For the active enum value, we will use our damage type variable. And if you right click it, you can add the hit, penetration, and projectile nodes. I won't add the none pose because we can simply use the default pose for that. Pose, we will get our default pose that we cached. And for this example, I will also use it in the hit pose, meaning if I hit the enemy with a blunt object, he won't play a specific animations. Here we will only use the physical animation, but you can add whatever animation you like. And then we will also need another animation layer called body hit location. This also needs an input pose. And here we want to also blend the poses based on the body part enum. The active enum value is our hit body part. And here again, none, you need to add the none. If it is none, we will simply go to the default pose. But make sure to add all the other animations. Our input pose is going to be our default pose. And then for the rest, you can search for your animations. Now I only created the animations for the left, so I can get at my injured arm left and put it into upper arm L. Simply duplicate this and mirror it for the right. So mirror with our MDT many mirror asset that we created a while ago. And then do the same for the other animations. Now that that's done, we can go back to our hit reaction. And here I want to use the body hit location. For the input pose, I also want to use the cached default pose. And since I'm going to use this twice, I am also going to save this as a new cached pose called body hit pose. And then I will use it for the penetration pose and the projectile pose. Now, of course, here it will play the same animations for when you, for example, stab the arm or shoot it. If you want to use different ones, you can basically also do this in here. I created a new animation layer, so it's a little bit cleaner and there isn't as big of a mess all in here. But with this, you can basically create this whole thing as an animation layer for every different hit reaction. So one for hit, one for penetration, and one for projectile. So it's quite customizable. And one more thing that's very important, if you select the blend poses node, make sure to tick the option reset child on activation. Do this for the hit reaction and the body hit location. Because if you don't do this, the animation, when it plays the second time, it usually gets stuck on this Enum notify. I'm not too sure why, but just enable the reset child on activation and then it should be fine. One quick thing, if you try to test it, you can simply drag out the enemy out in the world. And right now, if I were to just play this in selected viewport, I can't just, for example, grab the axe and try to hit him with it, because if you open up the weapon base in the event graph where we handle our hits, we check if the weapon has an owner. So you will actually either have to bypass this by just simply not including this is valid check, or you will just have to test it in VR yourself. Same goes for the penetration. It won't start penetrating if the owner is null. We did this when we created this whole blueprint. So weapons that lie on the ground and that aren't being used right now don't just damage the player or the enemy. One thing that I forgot, which is also very important, in your enemy blueprint, select the enemy itself, go to the top right to the details and search for tag. And under actor tag, add a tag called penetrable. If you remember the weapon melee part, we need this so we can actually stab the enemy. Otherwise, the weapons won't penetrate the mesh. Now again, just a quick note. This is still a bit buggy because it's still experimental, the whole stabbing part. It works well for static objects, but there is still some bugs with moving meshes, or skeletal meshes, I should say, but it should work well enough for now. Like I said in the beginning, the next video is the C++ version of this series and will take a while. If this video was helpful to you, make sure to like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you need any help, and I will see you next time. Bye!